You won't believe this, but for nearly 30 years of my life, I had to play the role of the strong child, just to keep a decaying family from completely falling apart. If someone looked at my family from the outside, they'd see a picture-perfect American household in a quiet Portland, Oregon suburb. A white house with a picket fence, a dad who worked as a bank manager, a mom who was a part-time elementary school teacher, and 2 kids, 1 boy, 1 girl. But beneath that glossy paint was a slow-burning storm that lasted through my entire childhood. A storm named favoritism, injustice, and the sweet manipulative control of my parents. I'm Alice, 32 years old, and I can still vividly remember the suffocating pressure of being the ideal child, while my younger brother Brandon was forgiven for everything without lifting a finger. Since kindergarten, I was taught that success was my responsibility, while Brandon only needed to try his best. I grew up in a world where fairness was a luxury, and the older I got, the more I realized I was just a character in a family play, directed by my parents. I clearly remember when I was 15, I got grounded for a month just for scoring an A on a physics test, a minor mistake that, to my mom, felt like a cardinal sin. They said I was getting complacent and lazy. That same week, Brandon, then 8 years old, got caught stealing money from our dad's wallet for the 2nd time in a month. My mom's reaction? A sigh and, "He's just going through a developmental phase, he's sensitive." Sensitive? What about me? Whoever asked how I felt staying up until 2 a.m. studying while Brandon's laughter echoed from downstairs as he played video games nonstop? Who cared that I was juggling school and a weekend job at a sandwich shop just to save for college, while Brandon never even had to wash a single dish? I lived by an unspoken rule. I carried the weight, and Brandon was excused. When I aced all my AP classes, my mom just smiled and said, "Well, that's what I expect from you." But when Brandon barely passed a 1st-grade math test, the entire house celebrated like he'd won a Nobel Prize. My dad used to say, "You're the older sister, you have to set an example." But when I asked why Brandon wasn't punished for skipping school 3 days in a row to play video games, the answer was, he needs time to find himself. Meanwhile, if I missed even a single day due to a headache, I'd get that look of disappointment. The unfairness wasn't just in words, it showed in actions too. At 17, I started working at a coffee shop before school and helping out at the library on weekends, all to save for college tuition. My family didn't give me a single dime. Meanwhile, Brandon, who skipped his high school graduation exam due to mental stress, still got a full allowance and even a used car at 18 because he needs encouragement to move forward. I used to think that if I just worked hard enough, they would see me as a child worthy of unconditional love. But what I didn't realize was that love in that house always came with conditions, and the only condition that mattered was, I had to sacrifice. The pain wasn't just in how I was treated. It was that I was never allowed to be weak. When I went to college on scholarships and student loans, I never dared to call home to talk about surviving on instant noodles. Because I knew the answer would be, "You're doing great, you're strong." And Brandon? He dropped out of community college after 1 semester because the academic environment made him feel stifled. My parents embraced him like he was the world's biggest victim. Once, I asked my mom, "Why have you never said you're proud of me?" She was silent for a moment, then replied, "I knew you didn't need that." But I did. I needed it more than any praise Brandon ever got. I needed, just once, to feel like I was loved for who I was, not for what I could endure for everyone else. And that's when I understood. I was never truly their child the way Brandon was their son. I held the role, Brandon held the love. I left home on my 18th birthday. No party, no cake. Just an old suitcase, a few sets of school clothes and an empty envelope my mother handed me with a dry "Good luck, daughter." I knew there wasn't a penny inside, but I still smiled and said thank you. Because it was the first time she had called me daughter, in almost a year. I rented a dingy room in East Portland with an old classmate, Alyssa. Every morning I got up at 4 a.m. to take the early shift at a donut shop 3 blocks away, then rushed to community college, then to the library for my evening job. No one helped. No one asked if I had enough to eat. But for the first time in my life, I felt free. And that was enough to keep me going. While my friends spent weekends hanging out, I mastered how to stretch a student budget to the last penny. 1 pack of ramen split into 2 meals, a second-hand winter coat from the thrift store, and a beat-up old laptop I bought after working non-stop for 6 months. The same one I used to write my graduation essay and apply for a transfer scholarship to Oregon State University. I chose to study information technology, partly because I loved it, but mostly because I knew it was my fastest way out of the swamp called family. While Brandon lounged in the living room, gaming all day and whining about the slow internet, I studied through the night to pass every exam. I remember one night after midterms, I called home to share the good news that I had landed an internship at a software company in Salem. My dad's only reply was, try not to let them down. I once sat staring at my phone, waiting for a congratulations that never came. 3 years later, I graduated with honors and got a job offer from a startup in Seattle with a starting salary of $60,000 a year. I moved into a tiny apartment, paid for with my own money. The first time in my life, I didn't have to share space with anyone. No nagging voices, no tiptoeing around to avoid making someone else feel inadequate. I was the owner of my life. When I was 28, I bought my first house in Beaverton. Not big, but it had a backyard where I could grow lavender, and a small kitchen corner I loved. I thought I had escaped the past. But then, the phone rang again. It was my mom calling, and as always, her voice was sweet. Suspiciously sweet. "Alice, honey, I heard you bought a house. That's wonderful. But Brandon's been going through a rough time lately. He just lost his job, and broke up with his girlfriend. Poor thing." I didn't even have time to respond before she launched into what felt like a well-rehearsed script. "Would you mind letting him stay with you for a while? He needs space to recover emotionally. Besides, your house is pretty spacious, isn't it?" Spacious? I had 2 bedrooms, and the extra one was my home office. But more importantly, I had worked hard enough to buy a house, and they still saw me as a hotel. I declined, gently, but not even 2 weeks later, I received an email from my father, cold, sharp. "Do you even know what family means, Alice? It's about helping each other in hard times. You may not need anyone, but your brother does. He needs his sister. And this family needs you." I wanted to laugh, but my throat tightened. Since I turned 18, I hadn't received a single dollar from them. When I had to choose between paying for textbooks or the electric bill, no one called. When I had an emergency appendectomy and stayed in the hospital for 2 days, no one showed up. But now, when Brandon lost his job because the company didn't understand his creative work style, they turned to me. Since then, every time Brandon failed, which was about as often as the sun rises, I became the default solution, investing money for his fresh start, covering his rent because he was scammed on a lease, even paying for a lawyer when he got sued over credit card debt. One time, I was prepping for a major client presentation when my mom texted, "Brandon needs to borrow $2,000 to fix his car. He's stranded on the highway. If you don't help, who will?" I didn't reply. That night I received an audio recording via email, my father shouting at me, calling me a broken ATM with legs. I cried. Not because of what he said, but because I realized I had never truly been seen as a person. Just a function. My success was never something they were proud of. It was just an asset to exploit, and I began to understand. I didn't need to wait for them to change anymore, because they never would. I was in an online meeting with the tech team when my phone started buzzing non-stop. "Mom" flashed on the screen 3 times in 10 minutes. My gut told me nothing good was waiting behind those calls. My mom didn't call to check in, she called when she needed something. And this time, I was more right than ever. I answered, and before I could say a word she started. Her voice dripping with honey, but every word sent a chill down my spine. "Alice. How are you, sweetheart? I heard you've been busy, but Don't forget to eat well, okay? Your company's still that tech, whatever, right? Got a boyfriend yet? I sat still in my home office, the late afternoon sun casting light across my tidy desk. And I knew exactly what was coming. The conversation was never about me. It never had been. Honestly, Brandon's in trouble, serious trouble. He owes a large sum to some people, and they're not the type who wait around. You know what I mean, right? I didn't answer right away. I swallowed the sigh rising in my throat and kept my voice calm. How much? $40,000, Alice, but with a good job like yours, that's nothing. I nearly froze. $40,000. That was what I had saved over 2 years. Part for roof repairs, part for an emergency fund. To me, it was a safety net. To my mother, just a number on a screen. An easy fix for Brandon's endless mistakes. I can't, I said, for the first time in my life. Directly and without hesitation. Silence. Then her voice cracked, like a scene in a play being performed yet again. Raspy, like she was crying. How can you be so cold? You're his sister. You've always been the strong one, the successful one. And your brother? He's sensitive, he's fragile. He's not like you. I sat still, feeling empty. On the other end, she kept going, pouring out a prepared monologue of guilt. Don't you see? If he can't pay, those people will hurt him. He could die. And then you'll live the rest of your life with your brother's blood on your hands. Do you want to see his face on the news? I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because she was still using the same tired tricks, thinking guilt would bring me to my knees. I'm sorry, but not this time, I said slowly, clearly. A deadly silence followed. 5 seconds long. Then she switched tones, sharp as a knife. They're everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? You think just because you have money now, you can throw your family away? You think you're so successful, but really, you're just an ungrateful, selfish brat to the core. If helping Brandon is the condition to be considered family, then I respectfully opt out, I whispered. Not loud, but firm. I had never heard my mother so silent, and then she said the last thing before hanging up. You'll regret this, Alice, you'll live to regret turning your back on this family. The call ended with a cold click, but my heart was pounding, not from fear, but because I had just crossed a line. For the first time, I chose to protect myself. But I knew this wasn't the end. Brandon and my mother never accepted no as an answer. They didn't know how. And inside me, a sinking feeling warned me that something worse was coming. Less than 3 days after the call with my mom, I got another one, this time from the bank's security department. Hello, Ms. Alice Matthews. We've detected suspicious activity on your account this morning. Someone attempted to transfer $12,800 from your savings to an unknown account in Arizona. Fortunately, our internal security system blocked the transaction. I froze. We've verified that the login came from an unusual IP address, and the person was able to pass 2 security questions: the name of your childhood pet, and your first elementary school. Whoever it was knows you very well, Miss Matthews. I didn't have to guess. It wasn't my mother. It wasn't a stranger. Only Brandon, the one who lived next to me for over 2 decades, who grew up with me, who witnessed every memory and knew every tiny detail of my life. Could have answered those questions. I put the phone down, trembling. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Not because of the money, but because I had never imagined someone with my own blood would so casually try to steal from me like a criminal. I immediately changed all my passwords, called my company's IT department to request enhanced security. My personal computer, email, investment accounts. I reset everything. I installed anti-directing software, bought a safe and placed it in my bedroom. I no longer trusted anyone. That afternoon I got a call from Aunt Catherine, my mother's sister, one of the few people in the family who ever treated me like a real person. Alice, I've heard some things. From relatives. What's going on? Your mom told everyone that you refused to help Brandon, even though he's living in fear every hour because gangsters are after him. Something doesn't add up. I sighed and told her everything. From the begging phone call to the attempted bank transfer that morning. On the other end, Aunt Catherine was silent for a long time. Then her voice dropped. Alice. You're not the only one. Brandon contacted me 2 weeks ago saying he needed $5,000 for an emergency surgery. I almost wired him the money until I called the hospital to double-check. That's not all, she continued. I just spoke with Uncle Mark. Brandon told him he needed money to invest in a Google-backed startup. And Uncle Joel heard he'd been robbed and needed cash to replace his IDs. Everyone gave him a few thousand, and everyone's been grumbling about how that rich daughter sits in her fancy house, eating organic, while her brother is dying. I let out a dry laugh. Perfect. The script was already written. I was the cold-hearted rich girl living peacefully in her suburban haven, while the poor brother was about to be beaten to death. The only problem? Every line of that story was fiction. That night, I opened Facebook for the first time in a month. And just as I expected, my mom had, accidentally, left a lengthy emotional post set to public. Sometimes being a parent is heartbreaking. When the child you raise to be successful turns their back on family. When money becomes the measure of blood ties. But God knows who's right and wrong. And kindness will be repaid. The comments below were full of sympathy. You're such a wonderful mother. Your daughter is so cruel. I'll pray for Brandon to pull through. I read every line, my throat tightening. Not from anger, but from the realization that I once believed they could change. I used to hope that if I just tried hard enough they would finally see me. But no. They only saw me when I was useful. The moment I set a boundary, I became the enemy. I shut the laptop and stepped out onto the porch. The sun had already set, and the cold wind stung my face. I stood there for a long time, with one thought echoing in my mind. I'm not letting this go. If Brandon thinks he can lie, manipulate, and steal without consequence, he's wrong. And if my parents think they can paint themselves as the betrayed victims without me speaking up, then they never really knew who their daughter was. I couldn't stay silent any longer. After the bank breach and the wave of slanderous messages on social media, I knew I couldn't just sit back and hope it would all go away. I needed to face Brandon. I needed to hear the truth come from his own mouth. And if there was any evidence of criminal activity, I wouldn't hesitate to use it. Friday night, I drove to a rundown apartment complex in North Portland, where Brandon was staying with a few friends. I didn't bother to learn more about. Outside the building was a patch of dead grass and a dented mailbox. Apartment 2B reeked of mildew and cigarette smoke, dirty curtains hanging limp, and yellow light leaking from the windows like a scene from a low-budget crime film. I knocked 3 times. A moment later Brandon appeared. Hair a mess, wrinkled t-shirt stained with coffee, dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. "Oh, finally showed up," he said, leaning against the door frame like I was a utility worker there to check the meter. No apology, no sign of regret. I stepped inside and was hit with the sight of a room that looked like a war zone. On the table sat a mess of bank statements, credit card bills, a few old phones and tablets, their screens still displaying email inboxes and bank account interfaces. I glanced at one of the statements. It had my name on it. Another. Uncle Mark's. I turned to him, my voice cold and sharp. "You tried to hack my account." Brandon shrugged, like I'd asked about the weather. "I was just speeding things up. Mom said if you got pushed far enough, you'd cave." I just wanted to see if she was right. I froze. It wasn't just him. My mother was involved. They'd planned this together. They truly believed I would break if pushed hard enough. Just as I was about to scream, the door opened. My parents. They stood there like they'd been waiting for me. My mom in her usual long-sleeved sweater and flats. My dad with arms crossed, face full of fury. Not a word of greeting. "This has gone too far, Alice," my dad growled. "It's really disappointing that you'd involve the law in a family matter," my mom added, eyes scanning the room as if plotting how to erase the evidence. "I'm just trying to protect my assets from being stolen," I replied, steadying my voice even as my heart raced. "Brandon is desperate. He only did this because you refused to help. If anyone's to blame, it's you," my mother snapped, pointing at me, eyes blazing. "He committed a crime? He tried to access my account, used my personal info. And you're still trying to blame me? Family is about forgiveness," my father roared. "You're cold, selfish, hoarding your money while your brother is spiraling." I stared directly into his eyes, no fear, no trembling, just pure exhaustion. I took out my phone and played the recording. The entire phone call with my mother. Her begging, her threats, her exact words. "If he dies, his blood will be on your hands." The audio echoed clearly through the cold, filthy room. When it ended, I enunciated each word. "I'm sending this to my lawyer. If there's one more attempt to breach, harass, or steal from me, I'm calling the police. No second warnings." Brandon scoffed. "You'd really do that? To your own family? Real family doesn't do this to each other," I replied, eyes locked on his. My mother burst into tears, that same tired sob I'd heard my whole life. My father stepped forward, grabbed my arm, his eyes dark and hard. "If you walk out that door, don't expect to be part of this family anymore." I shook his hand off. No rage, no theatrics, just a short sentence, like a judge delivering a final verdict. "Good." I turned around and walked away, leaving behind the chaos that had trapped me for over 30 years. And the moment that door shut behind me, I knew I wasn't going back. I got home a little after 9 p.m. The Oregon sky was freezing, and the wind whispered through the leaves like venomous secrets. But I didn't feel afraid. I didn't feel sad. I felt awakened. For over 3 decades, I let them write my story for me. I was the cold, unloving child who didn't care about family. Meanwhile, Brandon, the shameless saboteur, was raised up as a damaged soul in need of saving. No, I wasn't gonna let them keep performing that play. It was time for me to take back control. I opened my laptop, logged into my email, and began drafting a message to every relative I had, including Aunt Catherine, Uncle Mark, Uncle Joel, and even a few I'd never been close to. The subject line was simple: "The truth about Brandon and my family." I attached the audio recording of the call with my mom, screenshots of the blocked bank transfer attempt, threatening messages from my father, and a set of photos showing forged documents I'd found in Brandon's apartment. In the body of the email, I wrote plainly, "No anger, no preaching, just the unfiltered truth." I wasn't writing to ask for pity or defense. I was writing so that anyone Brandon had lied to or taken advantage of would know they weren't alone. And to make it clear that I would no longer stay silent and enable this deception. But I didn't stop there. I made a public Facebook post, including a summary of the account breach, the audio recording, and Brandon's blatant admission I was just speeding things up. "Mom said you'd cave." I didn't point fingers. I let the facts speak for themselves. Less than 2 hours later, my phone exploded with messages. Not just sympathy, voices that had long been silenced finally spoke up. My cousin Monica messaged, "Brandon asked to borrow $3,000 last year to fly to his best friend's funeral. I still have the hotel receipt. From Las Vegas, same week." My younger cousin Travis shared, "He opened a credit card using my name. I didn't find out until my credit score tanked. I was too embarrassed to tell anyone." And the final blow. Brandon's old roommate, a guy named Liam, messaged me on Instagram. "I lived with Brandon in 2020. He took my ID, opened 4 credit cards, and vanished. Took me almost 2 years to clean it all up." The wave of outrage spread faster than I expected. A friend of Aunt Catherine, a member of HR at a major insurance company, shared my post in a local community group. Coincidentally, Brandon had just applied for a temp position at that very company. The next day I received an anonymous message. "Thank you for exposing the truth. We rejected Brandon's application after reviewing his background and the info online. Can't believe his parents still cover for him like that." But this wasn't just about Brandon anymore. My parents, who had worn the mask of a model family for years, were now the target of whispers and judgment within their church community. A former friend of my mom messaged me, sounding uneasy. "Your mom cried during service last week. She said you're making things up to destroy the family. But everyone heard the recording. No one believes her anymore." As for my father, his golf buddies cut ties. Those Saturday games, where he used to puff out his chest and say, "My daughter works in tech," were now just memories. No one wanted to hang around the man who enabled a scam artist's son. A few weeks later, I heard Brandon got evicted from his apartment after missing 3 months of rent. He was now waiting tables in the morning, delivering pizzas at night, and cleaning out storage rooms on weekends to get by. He called me once. A missed call, no message, no apology. I blocked the number. And my parents? Silence. No texts, no emails, no angry rants or weepy guilt trips. Just silence, like I had never existed at all. For the first time in years I could breathe without carrying the weight of their lies. I was no longer the ungrateful daughter mentioned at dinner tables. I was no longer a walking ATM. I was just me. 6 months after that fateful confrontation, my life had changed. Not through some explosive transformation, but through steady, quiet winds that swept away years of toxic residue clinging to me. I had just received the official email from my company. I'd been promoted to Northwest Regional Product Director. The project I'd led over the past year, a platform supporting remote workforce coordination, had exceeded its initial revenue target by 170%. During the virtual meeting with the executive board, the CEO said something that brought a lump to my throat. "Alice, it's not just your talent, it's your consistency and professional integrity that earned you this role." I shut my laptop and sat in silence for a few minutes. Not because I wasn't used to being recognized, but because, for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone anymore. My success wasn't about pleasing my parents or outshining Brandon. I succeeded because I chose not to let their toxicity define me. My little house in Beaverton was no longer a fortress shielding me from storms, it had become a real home. I repainted the living room olive green, replaced the curtains with soft linen, and planted more lavender in the backyard. Something I used to dream about back when I survived on instant noodles in a cramped student rental. I also started opening myself up to something I used to avoid: a healthy relationship. I met Ben at a tech conference in Seattle. He worked in UX design. Unlike the men before him who were threatened by my independence, Ben listened. He didn't try to fix me, didn't ask me to shrink so he could feel more like a man. I remember our first time at a cafe, when I shared a little about my family, everything I had just been through, and he didn't give me any hollow sympathy. He simply nodded and said, "Some people exist just to teach us where our boundaries need to be. Not everyone who shares your blood deserves to be called family." I looked at him then and knew. This was someone who wouldn't make me feel small for being vulnerable. We didn't rush. No unrealistic expectations. Just simple things. Walks in the park on Saturday afternoons, cooking together, or reading side by side in silence. I didn't need to be a perfect version of myself. As for my old family, they disappeared from my life completely. No more emails, no more accusations, no more family is everything speeches. According to Aunt Catherine, they had taken on the full-time role of victims, except now, no one was listening. People who once called them a model family avoided them at church. Brandon was still struggling with odd jobs, trying to rebuild a life he had torn apart with his own lies. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt relieved. I used to think I'd need lawsuits, legal action, and harsh punishments to be free of them. But in the end, Once the truth came to light, the darkness receded on its own. I no longer forced myself to be the good daughter to earn love. No longer felt guilty for saying no. No longer lost sleep wondering if I was being too harsh. I lived for me, I loved myself, and I allowed myself to let go of what was never mine to carry, even if it was labeled mother, father, or brother. At a speaking event for young women in tech, someone asked me, "Do you regret cutting ties with your family?" I smiled. No, because I didn't cut ties with my family. I walked away from people who only ever saw me as a role to be played, and found others, not by blood but by heart, who accepted the real me. The young woman teared up. And I realized, there are so many out there, just like I once was, still trapped by a false sense of family duty, and I want them to know. You're not selfish for choosing to protect yourself. You're brave. You're right. As I write this, I'm sitting in my backyard. Ben is grilling and a few friends are laughing around the wooden table. They all know my story. No one judges, they just ask, "Alice, what do you feel like drinking today?" I choose lemonade, because it's tart, cool and crisp, just like me now. And I know. I've finally made it out. Not through revenge, but through truth. Alice's story is proof that sometimes, the people who hurt us most share our blood. But the truth is, you are not obligated to sacrifice yourself just because someone shares your last name. When Alice chose to speak up and expose the truth, she didn't just free herself, she gave a voice to others who had been forced into silence. In real life, freedom sometimes begins with one firm no, and the courage to believe that you deserve peace. What do you think about Alice's decision and what she went through? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt family stories and powerful life lessons.